Okay, thank you everyone for joining us. I'm going to hand the controls over to Dr. Varun Rai. Dr. Rai is a professor here at UT Austin, an associate professor here at UT Austin for the LBJ School, Public Affairs, and he's also works with the Department of Mechanical Engineering. If you have any questions, please type them into the chat window, and he'll take care of them at the end of the talk. Thank you. Dr. Rai?
Great. Thank you so much for joining this webinar on hard science of soft costs, reducing solar costs, and accelerating adoption. What I'm going to do over the next 30-40 minutes is give you all a high-level overview of a lot of the work that I've been doing the past few years in collaboration with a lot of my students and research staff here at UT Austin, but then also several of the national labs, including BNL and Royal SNL, as well as at other universities, University of Arizona, Wisconsin-Madison, Yale, and CSU, on various aspects of solar soft costs. I would like to point out that much of this work has been supported by the US Department of Energy, by LBNL and RAL, as well as the LBJ School of Public Affairs. If you do have questions, please type them in. It would be great to touch base on those after I've finished speaking on the slides. And as I said, I'll just give you a very high-level overview. There is a lot of in-depth material behind it, so please feel free to ask me questions and clarifications about data sources, methods, and so on. I've abstracted a lot of that detail just so that I can touch many different aspects and see what hits a chord with this audience. So let's dive in. This chart here shows over time the installed cost of small-scale solar. So this includes both residential and commercial. And as you can see over time, the central solid black line is the mean price, and the dotted lines chart the 90th and the 10th percentile, and the gray background charts the whole full range of costs of installed PV. Couple things are important to note here. One is, of course, as we all know, prices have been declining rapidly. Certainly, they have come down dramatically over the last 15 years or so. But that trend hides two very important facts, one of which I'll highlight on this one, which is not every system costs has a low price. There is a lot of variation at any given point in time. So, one of the questions that we have tried to study quite a bit is why is there such a range of prices, even within a given geographic region for a seemingly indistinguishable good, which is an installed solar system. And second, related to that, as we'll see more and more as I progress through my slides, is what is the role of information and better informed consumers in terms of bringing those costs down? How does that supply-demand interaction play out, and what's the role of information within that? So, keep in mind the first question of interest is, why is there so much variation in prices? So as I was saying, the first thing to keep in mind is trying to understand why is there so much variation in prices and the role of information within that. The second thing that this largely downward and significantly downward trend hides is the fact that much of that decline has been on the back of reducing hardware costs, which is the cost of the modules and the inverters and so on. But now soft costs, which is the non-hardware costs, including things like supply chain costs, taxes, inspection, permitting, customer acquisition, profits, and so on, those form about 50 to 60% of the installed cost. And that has been a hard one to crack, especially in the US. There are studies that show that in Germany, the soft costs are half or perhaps even lower as compared to the US. So that's the other thing, that declining overall costs of installed solar is kind of hidden from that trend. And the overarching hypothesis of my work, and a lot of what you will see I'll present later on, is based on the fact that reducing the solar soft costs, which is the next big chunk of where cost reductions need to come from really is to do with learning both on the demand side, so by customers, and learning on the supply side, that is by installers. That's central, as I'll try to emphasize, as we collectively target reducing soft costs over the next few years. This is a slide from the US DOE in terms of what are the different emphasis points. You can see they're working on business innovation, different financing and business models, training workforce, networking between state and local decision makers, providing them with tools and so on, as well as data analysis, bringing a lot of big data and analysis to highlight what opportunities might be to reduce solar soft cost. I have worked on almost 4 quadrants, but the focus of today's talk will be more on the data analysis aspects. I'm happy to touch base on some of the other quadrants as well, but the focus will be on wherever we have been able to bring primary data to bear upon the question of soft cost reductions. As I pointed out, my emphasis has been to understand and apply the science of learning, both on the demand as well on the supply side. So on the demand side, customer acquisition is a big piece, but also is related to some of the other things that we talked about in terms of profits, but also how installers are able to organize their financing and business models. That all has to, at some point, touches upon how customers are engaging with this new technology. And so in that spirit, I should mention that something that is very interesting about PV is this is for the customer. Certainly, this is very novel. PV has been around for 30, 40 years, but customers are engaging with it only on a very novel basis. Almost everybody who is adopting it or considering to adopt it is doing so for the first time. So we don't have, unlike vehicles, for example, we don't have much experience dealing with this technology. So that brings a whole set of new issues with it. It's also capital intensive, requires $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 easily. It's a durable good, so last 15, 20, 25 years expected to last. And that means more likely than not, we're not going to have a repeat purchase experience. And in that, all these things put together, it's a very unique type of a product, a technology that has important implications for how the customer engages with the information that is needed in helping them make this decision. So a big part of what I've done, along with my collaborators, is to understand how do customers learn, that is, find and use information during their decision-making process to adopt or not adopt, sort of for that matter. And much of the talk will actually focus on this piece. A lot of my current work actually focuses on the supply side, on the installers, in particular, how installers learn from each other. And I'll highlight an ongoing 3-year project that we have under the SunShot Initiative that looks at knowledge spillovers and the sort of soft cost knowledge ecosystem. So that's how we are going to organize our presentation time. So let's dive in with some data. This is almost hot off the plate. This paper was released earlier this month or late in May. It uses a data set of about 250,000 installed PV systems across the US. So really large data set representing systems installed in about 34 US states. What you're seeing is the impact of different factors. I'll explain just in a bit some of what factors we are looking at. But this ties back to the question of what are the different factors that explain variation in prices. What impacts price variation? And price variation is important to understand, not just price itself, the level of price, but price variation is actually quite important because for a variety of reasons, prices may be different in different markets. And by markets, you could think of states or even at the county level. But within the same region, you would expect over time, as experience accrues, as the market matures, you would expect that variation in prices because of similarity of a variety of factors at a geographically limited area that variation to be much lower over time. And despite that, we have seen that variation has persisted quite a bit. And so this effort was looking at what factors explain a lot of that variation. And what we find is factors that are associated with information and with business models. These are the two main important factors that impact the coefficient of variation, or which is a measure of how much prices are varying within specific limited geographies. So the unit of analysis here is at the county level. And so the top variable that you see is how many systems at the county in a given quarter are third-party owned. And the percentage changes are basically if you are changing that variable from the mean level to the 5th percentile or to the 95th percentile. So if you look at the TPO variable, which is negative, it means as the share of third-party owned systems increase, it has a negative impact on the coefficient of variation. So it reduces price variation. And for that matter, quite significantly as you move from the mean to the 95th percentile. And that's understandable given that TPO systems have been known through previous work to have a much narrower price range for a variety of reasons. We can get into that. But the first point there is that depending on the type of business model or financing that is backing these systems, that's an important piece of understanding the price variation of these systems. And I'll have a little bit more to say on that on the next slide. And the second set of important variables are those related to information. So having neighbors in the system, so that sign, the minuses or the plus signs indicate the relationship of these variables with the coefficient of variation. So having more neighbors with installed solar systems is associated with lower variation of the prices. And here, and likewise, getting more quotes per installation, that also is associated with negative variation. And both of these have to do with if you get more quotes or if there are more neighbors, there is more accessible, local, trustworthy information that is highly relevant to the decision making, and that gives the customer highly targeted information that they can use in their decision process and in their interaction with installers to come to a price point or to understand the price point for that matter. And these are associated with lower price. These are very high-level top-down models looking at a very, very large fraction of the system. There is the other side of the story, which is the bottom-up, which is how exactly does this play out at the individual level. And so a lot of the remaining slides that I'll show you try to hash that story out, which is how does it actually play out in terms of the individual decision-making process. Let me start by talking about the business model, just to give you an example, and we can get into more discussion during Q&A. So this is data from a survey we did in California during 2014 and 2015, and this is just a sample. We did multiple of those surveys. This is just one of those administrative or utility regions. And what you see is how aware were different customers of different ways of going solar. So were they aware whether they could lease or PPA or buy? For example, the number 132 buy, those were customers who only had the option to buy, or at least they were only aware that they could only buy. And the 106 in the center, of the respondents, those were the folks who were aware that they could either lease a system or buy a system. And the 82 at the very center are the respondents who had the option to either lease or buy or PP. And this is all very interesting because then this allows us to understand what specific attributes were the customers looking for, were interested in, were valuing, that then incentivized or motivated them to go one way or the other, given they had multiple choice or routes to adopt a system or not. And so after different types of analysis, these are a couple interesting things that we found. In terms of choosing the third-party ownership model, and this is all given customers had option to buy also, was availability of upfront funds. So folks who were cash strapped for any number of reasons were certainly more likely to choose third-party ownership. But then also customers, irrespective of whether there was any cash availability issue or not, their concerns with operations and maintenance. If folks are more concerned, then they're more likely also to go third-party ownership, which makes a lot of sense. If you look at folks who are more likely to buy over going for third-party ownership, these were groups of folks who were a lot more interested in looking at PV as a financial investment tool. And when we looked at their attributes and the actual decision process, they were doing a lot more financial calculation. They were speaking with the neighbors more, and overall financial returns were a lot more important to them. So, overall, third-party ownership for the folks who are going for these models were more related with offsetting part of the uncertainty in terms of the decision making and what these systems would entail over the 20-25-year lifetime, offloading a part of that risk to the third-party owner. So it was risk and uncertainty related. And for the folks who are buying, it was more related to financial returns and as an investment vehicle. Those are details, but the big point is that customers have heterogeneous preferences. This is not new, but it does have a lasting implication, which is one has to, and this can be an installer or a larger entity or group of installers that have to try to figure out as much as they can about what the customer cares about, and then accordingly come up with tailored products. So it has to be a matching of customer preferences and attributes and products that would make them more comfortable, whatever makes them comfortable, right? So there has to be that matching in order to break into the next wave of customers who are even more risk averse. And this point will come up a couple more times later on. So heterogeneous preferences will allow to make more tailored product. That has to be discovered.
If you dialed in with your phone, can you please make sure that you mute it? Thank you.
Great. So moving on, now looking a little bit more into the information aspects, one of the things that has come up consistently very significant in much of the work I've done, but a lot of increasingly a lot of other work that is coming out here in the US, but also in other places, is the role of peer effects. Is in particular in a very localized fashion. So small geographic regions around the house. So some of the early work in this area was done by Bullinger and Gillingham, who looked at zip code level data, and they found that peer effects increase the probability of adoption. So if your neighbors have adopted, then all things equal, probability that you will adopt is increased. We did a bottom-up study in 2013 where we found that peer effects accelerated adoption as well. So not only increased the probability of adoption, but then cut down the adoption time by about 2 to 5 months, or about 30 to 60%. The chart that you're seeing at the bottom, this was again data using data in Texas from 2009 to 2012, where the mean adoption time from when somebody started thinking about going solar to actually signing a contract was about 9 months. So that's indicated on the x-axis as the mean 8.9 months. And the different bars are how much time were folks taking given they had encountered a certain effect. So for example, the neighborhood contact bar is, say, given somebody had spoken with somebody who had a PV system in their neighborhood, their adoption time was about 4.5 months, so much lower compared to the mean adoption time. And then since then, there have been other studies by Gillingham, by our group, and many other studies that have shown similar effects of peer effects being very significant. So this is, again, this bottom-up story where, given the novelty, the complexity, the durability, and the large capital-intensive nature of solar, this very localized nature of what is relevant in terms of information that is helpful for decision making, that's been a very consistent finding across different studies. One can extend this further and ask, well, sure, but does it really matter at much larger scale? And I kind of showed you the chart with the coefficient of variation and neighbors and systems in the neighborhood being significant, but you can ask the same question from different perspectives. Here I'm showing you a chart. This is based off an agent-based modeling that we built. This is at the household level using every single family household in Austin, so about 175,000 households, where we simulated their decision to adopt or not adopt solar over about 10 years. This is entirely empirical, so this is validated as well as we could. In the curves are adoption, number of systems adopted in Austin over time. So the yellow curve, which may not be entirely visible, is the actual adoption. And the four different curves, the green, the red, blue, those are different scenarios that are based off the agent-based modeling. And I'll just highlight two of those curves. So the ones that are being pointed by the black arrows. One of them is the light blue, and it's the economic only scenario. And the second curve that we should focus on is the dark blue, which is the base case scenario. And what's interesting about these two is one of the models, the economic only model, focuses only on the economics of the project at the household level. Whereas the base case scenario also includes social effects. So what was the impact of neighbors having a PV system? And what we find is that when we focus only on the economics, we are okay in terms of predicting the rate and scale of adoption, but we are making significant errors in terms of where these systems were located. So the spatial structure, we are fine temporally, but we are missing the spatial picture. To get the spatial picture right, which is very important from design of distribution systems, utilities are very interested in understanding where these systems come up and what's the co-location of these systems. To get that right, we had to necessarily include the social aspects, in particular peer effects in the model. And that you can see in the two yellow geographical charts. The one that is below the base case scenario, which includes the social effects, that has very few red spots. And the more red it is, the more error it has compared to the actual empirical scenario, actually what played out. And what you see in the economic only scenario, you have a lot more red spots showing a lot more error in terms of spatial prediction ability. And this is another way of showing that not only at the very individual level is this information and social effect important, but then it actually does aggregate up and make an impact in the spatiotemporal patterns of adoption of solar systems. So to kind of summarize this part of the highlight up, I would just suggest that peer and social effects matter a lot in PV adoption, has been consistently found to be significant, and it's advantageous to leverage these forces. And for that matter, many installers have been trying to do this. Many utilities also have been trying to do this, and there are a couple ways to think about this. One is certainly higher incentives or discounts in for early adoption in new markets. So when a new market is starting up, getting those initial systems installed in those markets is certainly very important, because then that there's a compounding effect of those systems in terms of the peer effects. At the installer level, facilitating interaction between adopters and their neighbors who have already gone solar. And there are a couple of different ways of doing this, and there have been many experiments at the installer level and actually doing some of this. Referral bonuses, open houses, and effectiveness will vary, but in terms of the process actually playing out, that we know it does play out in terms of what might be more conducive for a particular installer. There is again going to be a variation of how they may be able to leverage the bottom-up peer effects or not. And the other thing, and this is some recent work we have done. I am not presenting details of that, but I'll note that we have studied different markets and found that the way peer effects play out and their stability is actually very, very striking. The importance of local information sources, they are quite persistent, and even after rebates have dwindled and markets have either matured or even they continue to mature, at least the data, all the analysis that we have done, and we have looked at multiple different markets, we find that these effects are quite stable. They persist, and more than any other information base, they have more of this longevity and effectiveness aspect to them. So to the extent those could be leveraged, that would certainly be quite advantageous. And just a couple of weeks ago, Google Project Sunroof is starting to show how many folks in your neighborhood, in your county, have gone solar, and there are different levels of abstraction. And here, the highlighted portion is the zip code that I live in. It shows the total solar potential, how many systems have gone solar, and this is a tool that I think would be quite interesting to watch and see how it makes an impact. But it does hit at that aspect of this very local nature of how people go about the decision to adopt solar or not. Let me highlight a couple other pieces before moving on to the supply side of works. One of the other things that we have found to be quite interesting is when people go solar, it's not just that they just go solar. In fact, it turns out that they adopt a number of other technologies right before, at the time, or a little after going solar. So it's really going solar is part of co-adoption of a family of energy-related technologies, and this is also based on survey data from California, where what you're seeing in terms of data are how many adopters of solar, what else were they doing at the time they went solar. So for example, many people were getting new roofs. Many people were making major energy efficiency improvements, so right at the second last row from the bottom, and a whole range of other things that were happening all at the same time, right? And there are very important implications of this for understanding energy use and what solar does or not, and what the impact of adopting solar is on home value and so on. One has to really understand this co-adoption piece to really pinpoint what the impact of solar is. But in terms of soft costs and customer acquisition, I think one of the interesting implications of this is that targeting only solar cell sales may actually be missing an opportunity, but actually it might even be misaligned with the customer decision-making process. When they are going solar, it is not just going solar, it's probably part of a bigger home improvement plan. And so understanding what those needs are is going to be relevant, and increasingly seems like it's moving in the direction of integrated product offerings to satisfy those needs and bring home the point and understand the customer's needs of what those array of things that they are interested in, and not just solar, right? So far we have spoken mostly using solar adopter data. Some of the interesting work we have done recently is using data for non-adopters of solar. So folks who have not gone solar, and the question is, well, what are they thinking? And things on the non-adopter side are actually even more striking. So this is some data from Texas, and what we find is a lot of the non-adopters are actually anchored and misanchored for that matter. Solar is perceived as being unaffordable, and that has to do with lack of customer awareness of price, about performance of solar, lack of awareness of financing options, and lack of awareness of incentives. So in many ways, it seems like folks have a perception of the price of solar that is anchored 10, 15 years ago when things were actually expensive. But that has not been corrected. And we certainly find that. So this was in all across data from all across Texas, and we find that to be a consistent picture. So at least here, in terms of attitudes are actually quite favorable in terms of people wanting to go solar and valuing different attributes of solar. That we found was quite positive. At the same time, awareness of incentives was very low. So this was both uh, awareness of federal incentive, but also awareness of local incentives. So incentives given by either munis or IOUs and so on, that awareness was, we found only 16% of the respondents, this is all non-adopters, were aware of any incentives available. And that's quite striking, and it goes back to the point of how is information found, and then if found, how is that information used in making the decisions. And so I would like to suggest that owing to different types of biases and how information is received, accessed, and perceived subjectively, that understanding that is I think is going to be very important as uh, solar tries to break into the next big wave of adopters, which is really almost everybody, because the adoption process in many ways has just begun. As I said before, uh, the attributes of solar, so the novel nature, capital intensive, durable, make it a complex decision process, right? Which involves interaction of social, behavioral, as well as economic factors. When when customers in general, not just with solar, but in general, when they are faced with a novel and uncertain situation, they fall back on trust-based networks, whether this is related to health or whether this is related to any other decision making. That's consistently the case. There are a number of other things, anchoring effects and ostrich effect, which are all behavioral in nature. One of the ones which is more commonly known is this notion of confirmation bias, which is we try to look for information which confirms what we already know. And so what it means is if we encounter new information which doesn't gel with what we already know, we tend to discard that, and that leads to echo chambers. And this all has, I think, important implications for updating the misanchored perception that a lot of the non-adopters appear to have about cost of solar. And so one of the things that we have done recently is not only try to understand the attitudes and perceptions of customers, but then go to the next step and ask, well, what can we do to actually break some of these barriers? One of the things we did recently is designed a gamified system for information delivery, which we call the energy games, which focuses on both energy efficiency as well as solar. And the idea there was, can gamification be used as a tool that can address some of these biases? And this is just a snapshot of how this game looks like on a mobile platform, where you get a question and you have a few options to answer, and then you get an instant feedback. And this is a trivia style game, and the question was, could this be effective in addressing some of the biases that you're discovering through in the data for non-adopters? And the idea here was simple. A platform like this focuses on delivery of basic objective information, It has the potential to be specific and vivid and personalized, something that is very important. Given the importance of local information, a platform like this can be very targeted. It reduces information search costs because the information can be distilled and actionable because you can tie it to in a very geographically limited manner, so it can be specific and targeted. And then because players have to interact with the information, they have to make a selection, they get immediate feedback, as we have found after doing experiments in different parts here in Texas, but also across the U.S., that this type of an information delivery system actually has potential to confront as well as correct misperceptions. I'll abstract out a lot of detail, just give you key insights of what we're finding. We found that important behavioral attributes that are important in terms of making or intending to go solar, those were being consistently and significantly increased by folks who played energy games. And this was all done in a randomized controlled trial setting, so we have very high confidence in what we're learning. And part of this is that as the users were interacting with the information that was being delivered on this platform, it was not as if somebody was reading a pamphlet where a lot of the other biases, for example, a confirmation bias can come into play, and one can just gloss over all of that information. As against that, on a platform like this, you have to interact with the system and bring to bear whatever your beliefs are, and then quickly find out whether that's in line with the objective fact or out of line. And so there's this instant learning and interaction that happens, and that leads to more discovery points, more aha moments, which we then discover has a direct and significant impact on the agency, which is the ability to act for these players or potential customers. So overall, in our work in this area has suggested through multiple experiments that we have done is that simple games like this could activate the passive potential customer base, which I have highlighted before. As the installer community tries to break into that, this is a segment that is a lot more risk averse, but whose information readiness is actually at a much more difficult point. So the installer community and other actors, for that matter, will have to be a lot more creative in terms of how they engage with this next very large wave of potential customers. So with that, the next few slides, I'll highlight a new study that we have ongoing right now. We don't really have a lot of results to show here, but I think this is a study that covers a very important part of the story. And this study focuses on soft cost knowledge ecosystem, focusing on the installers. In particular, a lot of the work that we have done in collaboration with Lawrence Berkeley Lab, Yale, and University of Wisconsin shows that knowledge spillovers, which is, it's not just that an installer installing more systems then has experiences learning by doing and its own costs go down. It's that learning by doing actually has an impact on other installers' costs as well. So the learning by doing spills over. So if I am an installer, I install and learn, that reduces others' costs as well. And this is we have found this to be significant. And the question, there are two questions. One is what is the level of this spillover over time? And second, are there any bottlenecks in this spillover? Can there be more of these spillovers? And what are the mechanisms and channels of this spillover? So this is entirely focused on installers. And this is a 3-year project that is funded through the SunShot Initiative under the Solar Energy Evolution and Diffusion Studies program. And I've included the link that has more details, but I'll highlight a couple more points here. the overarching question in this project is focusing on the installers as the unit of analysis, who learns what, how, and from whom. So this is going very deep into if they're learning in terms of managing permitting and inspection costs, if there's learning in terms of customer acquisition or integrating innovative hardware to bring down labor costs. Uh, that happens at the firm level, but how does that uh, move and get broader adoption in the installer community? What is their process? And we are taking a multi-pronged approach to get to this question, beginning with uh, a very detailed taxonomy of soft cost knowledge system. And I'll say a little bit more about that, but that's essentially what are the different pieces of soft cost, not at the very high level, but actually at a very detailed level. And then within each of those different elements, trying to understand what are the processes for knowledge production and acquisition. So how are different actors, installers mostly, but there are other actors like nonprofits who are operating in the space, how they produce knowledge related to reducing soft cost, and for that matter, to the extent they're not producing it and learning from others, what are those mechanisms of knowledge acquisition? But we are doing this all from a very network science perspective. How are different installers connected to each other? Not directly necessarily, but through supplier communities, through model suppliers or inverter suppliers, through nonprofits or knowledge uh, bodies, for example, different conferences. What are all those connections? How is knowledge related to every single soft cost element flowing between these different actors? Our efforts are also to measure spillovers much more precisely than we have done in the past, overall leading into an exploration of spillover mechanisms. How exactly are different knowledge elements moving across installers? And we have a range of different data collection efforts, including the full gamut really: archival research, interviews, case studies, survey data collection, pricing analysis on the lines of what we have done in the past, using a very large now that data set is over a half million systems installed in the US. Patents in balance of system allowed. My work has also focused on that. So balance of system innovations have a direct impact on soft cost, even though that is not understood very well. So we have been collecting data on installer patenting behavior in balance of system to understand that interaction. All of that feeding into a network analysis to give us understanding of how knowledge related to soft cost is produced, shared, and then used to reduce soft cost. So that's ongoing. I'll just give you one snapshot. This project began earlier this year. We are in early stages of pulling all the pieces together. But what you're seeing here is a snapshot of how we are trying to build the taxonomy. One of the things that we found early on is, even though there is recognition that soft costs are important and that there are certain common elements, especially at the high level. So, for example, labor costs, overhead costs, or supply chain or customer acquisition cost. Even reports or studies that are trying to address this are speaking different languages. There is not a common ground, and so it's been hard to build systematically a science of how one can go systematically about reducing soft costs. So the very first effort that we are doing right now is to look at the full range of studies that have come out over the last few years on the issue of soft cost, and then using all of that to build a systematic ontology, really. What are the different concepts related to soft cost? What is the hierarchy of those concepts? How they relate to each other? And so as the title says, we are interested here in learning the what, who, and how. So what really costs? What are the soft cost elements? Who are the actors? So who is causing that cost, or who is relevant to reducing that cost? And how is the learning to reduce that cost happening? So you're seeing in the second level, it says solar soft cost, but there are two other layers in that same two other elements in the same layer. One is the actor layer, and the other is the learning layer. And we are creating this hierarchy, and there's a lot more actually, and I've abstracted it because it is unwieldy after this, but there's a lot more detail. And we're just trying to make it as systematic as possible to track down very carefully and in a detailed fashion what the different aspects of soft costs are, and then to design strategy to address soft costs. And our goal is to have this tool live in the real world so that installers can actually use this as a benchmarking tool to collect their own data or organize their own data according to this systematic ontology, but then also see how their costs are tracking compared to an aggregate benchmark of installers across the US. But then also we are envisioning this ontology to provide a systematic standardized base so that different studies and different analysts can speak a common language in addressing soft costs. And we expect that both the installer community as well as policymakers and program managers will find this tool useful. So that's all I have for my prepared remarks. This is a number of studies that I've been a part of the last few years, all focusing on some aspect of soft costs. And I'm happy to get into Q&A and any discussions for the next 15, 20 minutes.
Sure, absolutely. There was one question that they were curious if they could get a copy of the slides. Do you have?
Yes.
Okay. So Arnold, it looks like yes, we'll be able to provide you with a copy of the slides. So I'll get those to you after the talk. We do have another question coming in via the chat window or comment. We'll see what he has to say. Just a moment.
Sure. So the question is, do you expect to see similar peer effects with regard to the diffusion of other EE technologies? And I take that to mean energy efficiency technologies. And so I'll respond with that view, but please correct me if I got it wrong. And we have actually looked at that question, and for that matter, some others have also looked. This is also part of our the non-adopter data collection, where we were interested in understanding peer effect for solar, but then also for energy efficiency, because that data was targeting energy a little bit more broadly. And we did find that for energy efficiency, the impact of peer effects was actually not as strong. And there is an intuitive explanation for that. Energy efficiency behavior is certainly not as observable. Observability is a big issue. So if I'm doing upgrades to my building envelope or to insulation material in my attic, these are hard in terms of visual observability. So certainly things that can be done to improve that visibility and observability, that can help. But in terms of the actual impacts they have, at least in the data that we have seen, it's not at the same level as for PV, which has a much more visual effect.
I have one question, just myself. I know here in Austin, you're able to opt into sort of a green energy option for your utility bill. Maybe you pay some small upcharge on your utility costs. A friend of mine in Tallahassee recently did it with his bill. Have any of your studies looked into that component as opposed to the option of installing solar on your own home? But if you're in an apartment and you want to participate, is it easy to get that data? Have you found any information?
Yes, we have done one study. So one of the papers in here, it's number 8. It looks at business model innovations for deploying distributed generation. It's community solar, basically. And that model is very interesting for two reasons. One is a lot of individuals, they live in multiple uh, family housing or high rises. They just can't, even if they wanted to, they just can't install solar, and that's a very large chunk of the population. So that's one reason. But second, community solar is interesting from business model perspective as well. It is something that doesn't sit behind the meter as customer-sided solar does, and that has important implications for utility business models. And for that reason, we're seeing a lot of different utilities being very interested in certainly experimenting with some of the community solar models. So both from the customer perspective as well as from the utility perspective, you are seeing this quite a lot of interest in experimenting with different types of community solar models. One of the things that we found was very interesting is certainly to the extent that folks are going solar at their residence, that has a direct impact on the demand that the utility is able to see. And looking at data from across the US, we found that the more that was happening, the more those utilities were interested in experimenting with community solar as a way of proactively creating choices so that customers could still remain more directly a part of their demand. So that was interesting. But beyond that, we have not, at least in my research, we have not looked at the decision making between. We have looked at, as I showed, buy, lease versus PPA. We have not added the community solar part into that mix. I think that's a very, today it has become a very relevant question because it is becoming more of an actual choice now.
Yeah, I think some of those peer effects that you talked about, especially in a decision like that, it's a lot easier to, okay, fine, I'll pay the extra, whatever it is. It's like the hundredth of a cent per kilowatt hour. There's some calculation.
Yeah.
If your friend is doing it or something, it's an
Yeah.
easier
Yeah.
it's an easier change than
Yeah.
installing panels on your home.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Were there any other questions from the folks in the audience? If you'd like, please type them into the chat window.
I had a question about, in the very beginning, you talked about a coefficient of variance. I guess I don't really know what that means.
Yeah, I should have. Thank you for it's a very simple measure of variance over mean.
Okay.
So it's a way of describing, quantifying how much that variation is. So between the 90th to the 10th percentile, for example, how can you capture that? So it's simply variance over mean.
Well, it doesn't look like we've got any other questions. Did you have any other comments you wanted to share? Or okay,
we'll make the slides available.
Yeah. So we'll make the slides available for those who are interested. And if you do have additional questions that you think of, let me know and I can pass them along. So thank you, Dr. Rai, for coming in and giving a talk to us and our audience. And if this is your first time tuning in on the web, this is an ongoing series, so please feel free to keep an eye on our webpage and join in on future talks. We try and have these every 2 weeks or so. Looks like there's one other comment maybe coming in the chat window that we'll keep an eye on before we let you go. So another person interested in the slides. No problem. If you can provide me with your email address, that would be great. My information's on nextgenpv.org. Or you can just type it into the chat window. Okay. Well, thanks again, Dr. Rai, and thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Thank you.